So I'm Rikki, and you know, this is my love story. I love the work I do. I love the work we do. I love creativity. I love theatre and film and radio and all the communicative arts, books, and poetry, and all of that. And it's great fun to talk about a bit of Shakespeare today, because Shakespeare has managed to do all of it, right, without even having to bother to be alive anymore. Has managed to every single art form and speak to every single kind of person, which is what makes this so exciting. And just for anybody, do I need to do a little description? Of course. So for anybody who cannot see me, I'm a bit short. I'm black, kind of tan coloured. I've got blonde dreadlocks down to past my shoulders, would you say? And I've got a lot of teeth and a big smile. And I'm wearing a jumper with a kind of light jumper with lots of big white stars all over it and white toweling tracksuit bottoms. Have I got that right? So, yes, my job is to make films and theatre. I do that in different capacities. I write plays, written a lot of plays, and I've directed even more. And I often design shows. I compose music for shows. I act in shows. I choreograph, and therefore dance and sing in shows. So I do all these different kind of things. I host events, as particularly Vogue balls. There's a lot of voguing balls up and down the country, and I tend to work in those a lot at the moment. Hosting these balls. I'm not a skilled voguer myself, but I love the culture, and I get to host them in Liverpool and in Manchester and in Birmingham and never in Nottingham yet, and Leeds and Newcastle. And getting everywhere with these is great fun. And so and also mentor. I get to mentor lots of artists, particularly actors and writers and directors, and so talk to them a lot about how to advance their careers or their mindsets, or how to break through walls. And actually, I'm here in Nottingham this week because one of the writers I mentor, and whose play I'm directing, is having an R&D over at the Nottingham Playhouse, and we're doing a sharing on Friday at 4 o'clock. So, and it's free. So if you want to come to that, get involved, to be forgotten about where it is or whatever, just at me through the social media, come along and see it. Amazing writer, and basically mostly queer cast and characters. So I would recommend it. It's called Rotten, and it's an hour long, and it's a really fun and a good meal. Also, what I'm doing is I'm working later on in this month. I'm going to be doing an R&D, research and development week, all around queering a Shakespeare text around the country. 1623, amazing company, is doing all this amazing work. Their passion is queering Shakespeare, essentially, and taking that in as many creative directions as they possibly can, and encouraging other people to do so. So there's a whole bunch of creatives who are all taking on different Shakespeare plays and queering them in their own way and making their own modern version of the play, rather than just a modernized Shakespeare production. They're actually, I think in many cases, writing their own script or dance pieces, or you get the idea. You know, it's queer people, so extremely creative. It's all going in 1,000 different directions. And I'm going to be working on, because I was the last one to be asked, I could choose what was left. And so I chose 3 plays, and the project I'm doing is called Toxic, Much Ado About Hamlet Shrew, in which I'm taking on the toxic masculinity inspired by the toxic masculinity that was in those plays. obviously in Taming of the Shrew, we don't have to really go into how toxic that's I mean, it's the play, and it's a difficult play to do now, and to interpret and to understand, and a challenge. But the in Hamlet, of course, the big. I mean, in Taming of the Shrew, Petruchio he is challenged to. It's not just that he wants to tame Kate. He's actually challenged to do it and impelled to do it, so his toxic masculinity is enforced from without, and that's interesting. And of course in Hamlet's father says, "Man up and avenge me," essentially within the first few minutes of the play, and Hamlet, who is an arty, intellectual, I think, queer person, then has to go on this journey of deciding whether to be a violent person or not, and under what circumstances violence is permissible, understandable, and how it can be approached. And of course, the whole thing's a disaster, and everybody ends up dead at the end. And on the way, he does something a lot of queer men do, which is drive his girlfriend mad and push her over the edge, and then has enormous piles of guilt around that. We know it's just blood everywhere on that one. And of course, in Much Ado About Nothing, Benedict is there's the frustration that Beatrice has about how men are the ones supposed to avenge people and take action, and so she impels him, who's always just been a witty kind of party boy. She's now making him go out and kill somebody to avenge her cousin, who she is much more in love with than she is with him. After he asks her, "Have you slept in her bed lately?" And she says, "For the last year." And so there's a lot of layers going on in there, a lot of different impulses. As you can see, I can interpret those three plays in so many different ways. But I'm going to mash them together and have lots of conversations with my cast, and then see what I can glean from that, and look at the pressures that come from families, beard relationships, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. Which brings us really to the fact that Shakespeare is such, there's a reason Shakespeare is so popular, and obviously the infinite amounts of ways you can interpret the writing is a big part of it. But I really want to push back on a lot of the, I'm not an academic, but a lot of the academia that I've looked at around this subject, basically, there's the whole theory that queerness is a new thing, that there was no such word as homosexuality before the 20th century, before the mid-19th century, and whenever anybody tries to say, well, Shakespeare might be gay, or people just say it's an irrelevant thing because gayness essentially didn't exist, is what people say. And it's very understandable that they say that, because it didn't exist for them, because they weren't there. But I think everyone in this room knows it's always existed, and that queerness has always been there. And you only have to look at most of the creation myths around the world. They always, basically, if you add up all the creation myths in the world, it's almost a consensus that the creator was trans. And that's always there, or at least intersex. And almost all of those things come out of that. Even the Christian one, where it requires somebody coming out of somebody else's body, etc., etc., etc. And so it's something that hasn't been articulated in the same scientific way, but has always been there. And in terms of, you can go to the 20th century, you can go to now, you can look at texts now and see that people are frightened to be open about their sexuality, and so they code it. People are still unpacking for like Chance the rapper, right? He has to code his queerness in his work, and so it's no surprise that Shakespeare is doing that way, way, way back in what's just coming out of the Dark Ages period in history. So I think the opposite. I don't think that we are gleaning queerness out of the work. I feel like it's screaming out of the work. The way that Michelangelo clearly was having to paint in churches, but just went, I'm going to make this super, super gay. I mean, they to the point where they were upset. They wanted to paint over it. They were quite shocked by what he painted, and so, but he did what queer people do. It's just be so fierce they couldn't paint over it. You just can't paint over this. You can't paint over Beyonce. You can't paint over you can't paint over John's song. They're just too good, and and so on and so. So if Michelangelo's work is clearly queer, or Caravaggio's, it's really, really obvious that they are. I think I feel secure in saying that Shakespeare was sending out all kinds of queer messages. Of course, I'm going to say the obvious, just to make sure that we all remember that these were plays at the time. Women were not allowed to perform on stage, so we're talking about boys on stage pretending to be girls, pretending to be boys, pretending to be girls. I mean, the layers were so intense. And the very fact that women were excluded from that was the fear of how sexual, there's obviously been millennia of fear of female sexuality, and the fear of unleashing that through these texts on stage was what really scared them. I went to see Maui, an all-female, all-black Shakespeare company, do a kind of monologue slam at the Globe last week, and to see women on stage just playing whatever they wanted and playing all those characters, it was overwhelming for the audience. It was overwhelming to see how alive the text became, and how powerful and how subversive and strangely reassuring as well, right? This is who we are, and they brought such power and depth and of every kind of femininity and masculinity and that women have access to was there on the stage. And Shakespeare was the perfect vehicle. If you listen to the music, you listen to the lyrics, you listen to what he's laying down, it's all there. You just have to let it out. So does anybody disagree with any of that so far? I mean, it's a similar narrative to the fact that one of the reasons with my Much Ado About Hamlet the Shrew project, I really wanted all the participants to be from working class backgrounds. And the reason I wanted to do that is because obviously there's the posh Shakespeare voice and trying to get beyond that. But more importantly, I wanted to push back against the assumption as also that Shakespeare, as a working class person, didn't have the education to have written all those plays himself, which just really, 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 really irritates me every time I see it. Like, why does, of course, there's stolen ideas from other people. I'm sure the stage manager went, maybe they should say this. And, oh, okay, I'll do that. I'm sure that happened. I'm sure the actors came up with stuff. That happens. So I collaborate with people all the time, and I help with their work sometimes. But it's still their work. It's still, I can't make it more talented than they are and more visionary than they are. I'm just helping them go, oh, you change that word, it might get where you want to go. Everyone does that, and I hope when people do it with me, I get notes. I've just sent the script off while I'm sitting here, and I'm going to get notes on it. So again, there's this interesting thing of squeezing things down so that they look like, so that the critic is validated in their background and in their biases and in their passions, and don't want to feel like they wasted time going to Yale or to Cambridge or to a Polytechnic in 1979. They are they're trying to hold on to their own validation, and I feel like it's for us to go into this work and get our own validation, because that's what Shakespeare does so well. And Shakespeare, I did a film for schools to tackle homophobic bullying, and in that I play a teacher, and I'm talking to the students, and we talk about whether Shakespeare was gay or not. And I said, well, whether he's gay or not, he had a gay heart. And we talk about what that means. And and I think that what we have with Shakespeare is somebody who, contrary actually to today's, we're now in a place where if you're white, you're not supposed to write black characters. I don't agree with any of that. I believe that Shakespeare embraced themselves as an androgyne as a writer, and took on subjects that would scare people now. Anti-Semitism, racism, I mean, it's really very broad. How many writers now do that? Well, I do, but not many others do. Am I making sense? I'm talking too quickly? All good? So I just really wanted to give us that permission to go anywhere we want with this, because I really feel that Shakespeare gave themselves permission to go anywhere they wanted as a writer, which is why it's so extraordinary. To me, every time I see Shakespeare, I'm often bored watching Shakespeare, but and then I close my eyes and listen to the writing, and it astounds me with its breadth of exploration, of humanity, including cruelty. It embraces absolutely everything, from the most reprehensible emotion to the most beautiful ones. And so I really want to give us that permission. In fact, you put the workshop right there, but you've got that permission, and you have that absorbed into your system. Then you don't need anything else from me, because it's all there in those texts and in many other great works. And fun enough, I was thinking about Sappho, who, and again, amazing queer artist who basically when they found Sappho's work, they burned it and destroyed it. So it's very hard to even find any of it. Most of it's quotes from other people who were mad fans of Sappho, and all the men at the time were just like, Sappho is the rock star. They all just lauded by everybody, but basically censored, because of course the centuries of religious wars and cleansings that went on. But one of the things that survived is this great simple statement: I declare that later on, even in an age unlike our own, someone will remember who we are. And I think that's what it's about. And and I think the person that has to remember who you are is you. That we have to remember who we are and be absolutely unafraid, because people will say when you queer Shakespeare, you're being indulgent and you're projecting, and that's simply not true. Shakespeare was accused of these things at the time. Okay, so does anybody have any anything that they want me to tackle, or want us to talk about? Anything that you want to get out of this workshop? You can say it at any time. It doesn't have to be now. This is I'm hoping that this will become more of a conversation, because I want to learn from you too. I'm just wading in the shallows of Shakespeare, and so I'm sure there are people who, certainly particular plays, you'll know better than me, particular pieces of work you'll know better than me. But is there anything that anybody wanted to get out of this?
Can I ask a question? Yes.
And there's someone online as well. We'll start here, because I saw the hand first, sorry, and then coming.
I want to have a discussion about cross-dressing and gender play. So I'm a drag king, and I've done some Shakespeare plays in drag as a man, and I find that a really interesting discussion to women being played by boys.
100%. So what they just said was, what's your name? Emily just said that that as a drag king, it would be great to discuss cross-dressing and playing cross gender. I mean, that's Shakespeare. That's core Shakespeare, right? That's the core of it all. It's great. Anyone else?
Oh,
wait, someone online first, and then.
Hi, sorry, it's Gary Thomas. Hi,
Gary.
thanks for doing this. I'm just wondering if you're covering any of the sonnets at all, because they're like really romantic, and I think you can kind of maybe insert them in certain plays to kind of.
I think we absolutely can. Yes.
Right.
I mean, some sonnets are startlingly on the nose.
Yeah.
Startlingly. I mean, there's a big discussion with the sonnets as to, please do. Can I thought, why didn't I say think like that? So what Gary just said was, are we going to discuss the sonnets? And because they're particularly romantic and beautiful. So I'm assuming that Gary loves romance, as do I. So, you started here my answer, which is yes, that I think the sonnets are particularly, they're particularly in your face about the queerness of it. Even if you think that they may have been commissions, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to think, the argument is maybe somebody asked him to write them for somebody else, and therefore they're not declarations of love directly from Shakespeare. You know, 2/3 of the sonnets were written to a beautiful youth, and then 1/3 were written to the dark lady, who's described as having curly, wiry hair and being dark skin and dark eye, and clearly would have been it could have been a Black or Middle Eastern or perhaps Spanish Tudor, but definitely not what would have been considered white at the time, because until the beginning of the 20th century, no one was white really, except Anglo-Saxons. Jews weren't white, you know, and Italians and Spanish people were not white, and they've all been made white recently to swell the ranks. In terms of demarcations with people. So again, there's so much that you don't expect to get from Shakespeare, and it's in there, but in some of the sonnets, that he's very, very, very clear. I'll find the one, there's a very clear one where it's the one about the master mistress. I mean, you know, I mean, who was he writing for? And it's so repeated. These themes come up so repeatedly that it's really hard not to see, as every writer writes some of themselves into what they write and into their characters, that what he's focusing on, of the obsessions, or they're focusing on, is very, very, very hard to dodge. And increasingly, as we understand gender more, which, when we're only on the foothills of that, of course, we're starting to understand that we're starting to see more and more in what's being written there. But yes, we will. Yes. Oh my God, love it! Could you keep it for me? We'll read it. Yeah, love it, love it. It's just a good one. And
yeah, sort of on the back of that, I think last time we did a Shakespeare, it was still very much the performance of gender as sort of the main construct. Quite interested now with gender theory is moving forward, and understanding how we talk about that, keep that useful, because obviously things around there is important to gender, but at the same time they have more back on the balance and track up as say gender theory. Where does that line
and
actually
okay.
really transgender line, because that again for me that's shifted massively.
And will again.
And will continue to shift.
Okay.
Where we read that line on the performing as well, not what how we perform basically. And do we need to think about that, or is that just something that people will draw themselves?
Fantastic question. So no, it's basically about, again, Shakespeare being so often about the performance of gender, and so when we play with that ourselves, when is that an expression of performance of gender and the reveal of gender, i.e., when someone is trans and what they're not. And what they're doing is letting go of performance of gender and moving into authentic inhabitation, right, of their gender. I think I'm not trans, so forgive me for putting my own shit on here, but I would say that if we are all performing gender, including trans people, because even if you're happy with your gender, there's an enormous amount of pressure on performing it. So I can't see, trans people are just like everybody else, and so they move into a different area of performance, because then they then there's a lot of expectations. You're not trans enough. Right now, the big argument is, well, and it's mostly around trans women. The pretty ones are okay, but what's this one? Right? Why does this one not look? Why does this one not look like RuPaul? You know, why does this one not look April Ashley? Why are they not the conventional idea of gorgeous, which we all know is misogyny, because it's really saying women must look a particular way to be attractive. So I think it depends on the actor, it depends on the character, it depends on the production. But I think that I think, you know, as long as we're respectful, I think that we have a absolutely free reign around that, because everyone is performing genders. I would say that, for instance, in the three plays I chose, Hamlet, Much Ado About Nothing, and Taming of the Shrew, all of those ostensibly male characters are being forced to perform gender. They're being forced to perform manliness. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I don't see how anybody escapes that. Even the most liberated of us is still, that being liberated is a stance in a storm of pressure. So is that? But that's, again, this is why Shakespeare for me is so freeing, because you can go all those different directions. Yeah, I mean, in this As You Like It, Rosalind goes off into the Forest of Arden, she's banished, and then becomes Ganymede. And Ganymede, for those who don't know, and I just about know, so I recall Ganymede is the water bearer in a court, who's so beautiful that Zeus turns into an eagle, comes down to Ganymede, who then with his water goes, oh, it's a nice eagle, have some water, turns back into Zeus, scares the shit out of Ganymede, turns back into an eagle, picks up Ganymede, and takes Ganymede away to Olympus, where Ganymede is now essentially the water carrier for the gods. So there's so much transformation going on there, right? And again, I feel like it was just the most natural thing in the world for ancient civilizations to think people change, things change. You know, we are, that we are literally fluid, right? And so Ganymede is immediately, by choosing that person, Shakespeare choosing that person for Rosalind to become, is immediately a lot's going on there. She's becoming the most beautiful man in the world, right? And the most desired. And then she's going through the forest, and everybody in the play is like, who's that? Ooh, the women, the men, they're all like, what is going on there, right? And I think at one point she then talks to her boyfriend, who doesn't seem to recognize her, she's so changed, which is great. And then she starts talking again, she pretends to be another woman. Right, so she is literally doing drag within trans, and Shakespeare's just like playing with us in this. And don't forget, it's a boy playing a girl from the very beginning. So I mean, I don't know how meta you can get beyond that, right? So again, I think he's offering us so much freedom.
Oh,
sorry. Because you were like, I can just do it all, honey. I can just do it all. I mean, it's so interesting, and the levels of desire and experimenting with, as we are now with, with social media, experimenting with narcissism and with, appreciation of other people and reclaiming. Such an interesting time, and it's become more relevant than ever. Sorry, you had your hand up before. I should have shared what you just said. I'll do that in a second. Sorry.
pretending to be herself. She's the wonder, and she just, I'll pretend to be
Oh, so she's doing analyst role play.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll be Rosalind. You talk to me. That's so interesting. And it's so interesting because, of course, so what was just said is that Rosalind, when she is pretending to be Ganymede and then pretending to be a woman for, what's his name? Orlando, which again is a name that's been taken into another whole androgynous story by Virginia Woolf, and you know, there's a lot of layers that history is giving us here. But also, when she does that, she's actually being herself. But he still doesn't recognize her, which tells you how much that Shakespeare wanted to say. It's all performance. It's all disguise. It's all boxes. People are seeing what they want to see. People are choosing not to see what they want to see. Because does he know? Right? Does he know? And is he just, right? Is this for him kinky cosplay? Is this, you know what I mean? Is this, oh, I think she's talking to me, so I'm gonna play dumb and actually open up to this, you know, or I get to speak to her without directly speaking to her, and I can, you know, there's so many ways you can play those lines. There's so much you can play with that. And again, I don't think that's accidental. I think Shakespeare was gleeful about it. So much of his work is about changing and transforming, and I think a lot of the work at the time was, but he just took it to levels that no one else has done. Just want to quickly repeat what you said, which was, you know, when I was talking about how you can be as meta as you want, it was playing Rosalind that made you want to become a drag king because of those layers and the playfulness of that. That's why I wanted to have you here at home. I had a hand over here.
How queer it's like you forget as you like, you know, just as you like in terms of gender, sexuality, love, relationships, as you like it.
Have it as you like it, baby. Have it as you like it. I mean, it's just much ado about nothing, really. Just get on with your life. Let's have a quick 5-minute break, because I know some people need rest. So we had some questions out there.
Yes, we've got 3 questions online. So we've got a question from Finch.
We've got a question from Finch. Will I be able to sit here?
I can use my voice. Hello?
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I wanted to ask / start conversation, whatever, about specifically the supernatural in Shakespeare plays. I've seen, like, I think, obviously, where, like, there's been a more recent, really queer production of Midsummer Night's Dream, but I feel like, in general, with the figures of the Fae and of the witches in Macbeth, one of the first things that they say about the witches is that they are outside of the gender binary in some sort of way. And even in like The Tempest or Queen Mab or anything like that, I think there's something about these. I think there's something inherently queer and non-binary and outside of binary in general about these supernatural influences that come throughout a significant portion of Shakespeare's plays, whether or not that is particularly Fae or outside of that. And it reminds me a little bit of Penda's Fen in a way, actually, with the way that these supernatural and this folklore comes to influence and subject a judgment, I suppose, on the heteronormative and the straightness of a lot of the rules that are in place and the problems that are to be solved. Because in Shakespeare, I think most of the problems come from a lack of queerness, and that sort of queering can bring about the resolution of the play.
You mean the problems for the creators, the creatives that take the play on, or the problems for the characters within the narrative?
The problem for the characters within the narrative, I think a lot of the time the solutions can come from the queering of the rules that have been set in place.
Okay, can I repeat some of what you said before I forget it?
Yeah.
So, because the people in the room here, we don't have an amplifier, so I've got you to myself. So the question that Finch was positing was, what about the supernatural elements in Shakespeare's work? Because obviously, a lot of the characters defy the gender binary and lend themselves, and they've always been able to be played by almost anyone. And they also are interesting often in terms of class and in class boundaries. And the magic is almost always about that. In The Tempest, in Midsummer Night's Dream, just giving Bottom a donkey head, an ass's head, turns immediately, it becomes a whole conversation about worthiness and where he belongs and what he can have access to and what he can't. And you get what I mean, and what it means about her and having this adoration, and whether that's actually funny. Because I've seen productions where Oberon thinks that's really funny, but actually it's not funny when she does it. She's giving love to this creature way that Oberon could never dream of getting from her, which is why kind of, let's wrap this up, because it's not going how I wanted it to. There's tons of transgression in those characters, but in terms of gender, Finch was talking about how the lack of queerness or the lack of queer options for the characters, am I right, Finch? Is causing problems for the characters, and often these kind of magical moments, which I'd include the cross-dressing, etc., for magical moments where they can overcome issues that they have, right? They suddenly find this freedom because they can look like one thing, but have the knowledge. They become two spirits essentially to steal another culture's kind of interpretation of it all, right? Is there more you wanted to say about that, Finch? I'm just catching him up with what you said.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Not. That's kind of where I'm trying to get a conversation going. In that, I don't know necessarily how further. I think there's definitely a lot to say on like queer time, queer temporality, and how the definition of queer within the Shakespeare definitely is a lot more intersectional in terms of that class, because I think that they all definitely interact. I think that what you said about Bottom was really interesting, actually. But I'm happy to kind of.
Finch is talking about how these things are all intersectional, which I've been just been saying really is that once that the spirits are able to provide a lot of intersectionality, as I said, race, class, gender, etc., comes into that, because of course, you know, obviously colonialism was actually in full force when Shakespeare was writing these plays. It was really, really happening, and we're still untying a lot of knots that were tied in that particular period, right? In the kind of you know, everyone was invading everybody else, but also discovering the quote unquote new world, which of course wasn't new at all, and so on and so forth, right? And so I think Shakespeare was aware of these conversations and wanted to talk about them. We were still having these issues right here in the UK with occupation of Scotland, occupation of Wales, occupation of Ireland, which is still a #1 issue to this very day. Right this week, we've been discussing the Northern Ireland problem, right? And that's really all about sovereignty and about borders. And so when you transgress the borders of the characters, of the genders, and the borders of the class stories, then you're starting to talk about the borders that exist in the world. So when you set a play on an island, which he does several times, it becomes a very definite discussion because this is an island. but it's not a united Ireland, even though we're called the United Kingdom. Right? It's such a big conversation. And I think that, again, really, to me, the conversation is, I invite you towards freedom from that. How do you want to interpret that? How do you want to look at that? I would go even further and say that the extremes of weather in some of these plays, the storms in King Lear particularly, obviously the Tempest, I mean, it's called The Tempest, but but storms and the way the natural world forces us to confront things, forces change, forces separation, forces togetherness is really, really important. And I'm gonna just be radical and say, I think weather is queerness in these stories. It's about just kind of just throwing everything up in the air and leveling out defenses. You know, you've got your organized defenses. This is a man, this is a woman, this is a king, this is a serf, this is a, right? And then the storms change all of that. It literally dethrones people, it humbles people, it elevates people, it transforms people. And I think he also likes to look at mental health issues like that. Like, I have to use his language and call it madness. And often he says, is this really madness? Is this clarity? Often people who are mad say to us, or pretending to be mad, will say to the other person, who's the mad one here? Just as the jesters will often say, or the fools will often say, who's the fool here? Do you see what I mean? And again, I think that's why I see it as such a gift, because even within the text, he's saying you can interpret these things any way you want. The fools often say, oh, I may be saying that, but you can interpret it the way you want. As you said, as you like it, or what you will. You know, I think it's I don't think it's accidental. Not when you do it that many times in that many plays. I'm sorry, it's still more, there's a few people in the queue here, but we will come back out here. Hi, Neil.
Hi, so here's my question, and it's related to the character itself and when they are traditionally straight or heterosexual. So if we're talking about like Midsummer, right, you have the Lysander Demetrius issue. Mm-hmm. But if we're changing one character to queer, but the others remain straight, how is this influencing the story that we're telling structurally? So I remember I was discussing when I was, I'm in preparation for directing Midsummer Night's Dream, and we're talking about Lysander, and possibly queering Lysander and making him a gay character. So if we're following the law, right, mm-hmm. This now becomes, you cannot love this person for a specific reason.
Oh, I don't agree with that.
And it's following societal norms, let's say, of that particular time, right? So I'm wondering, you know, as this is coming up and we're talking about how we're queering things in context. So how is it also impacting things like the structure of it and how we're conceptualizing it as it is being directed and performed?
Okay. So when you queer one character, is the question, how does that affect all the other dominoes in the story? If you want the other characters to remain notionally heterosexual, straight, then what? And how does that work? If you've got Lysander in Midsummer Night's Dream, so in the story of Midsummer Night's Dream, Lysander is wants to. Let's who is it? Which way is around is it? Is it Lysander who wants to marry Hermia, and they're the ones who run away, and Demetrius, right? And so Hermia has been promised to Demetrius to marry, but Lysander and Hermia are in love, and so they decide, no, you know, fuck this, we're going to run away, because the father just says, you're marrying Demetrius, and Demetrius wants to marry her. So it's a big mess. So Lysander and Hermia run away into the forest in Athens, and or surrounding Athens, and are trying to get away. And then Demetrius, there is Helena, who's in love with Demetrius, and she does herself no favors by saying, well, I'll help you find Hermia. They went this way in the wood because she's my best friend, I know where they went. And she basically rats her friend out because she wants to spend time with him, and she's hoping he'll somehow fall in love with her on the way. And I mean, there's so much you can do with those stories, and then they all four. So you've got the lovers who are in love with each other, running away, and you've got these two who are following, one of whom is in love with the one, you know, right? And he says he's in love with Hermia as well, but is he just trying to possess her? If someone's not in love with you and you insist on them marrying you, is that love? Is a whole question, obviously, and they shouldn't be ones we shy away from. So we're going to have to make our characters. We're going to have to find ways to love our characters, but be honest about their toxic or their fucked up impulses, because we've all got them. We've all wanted someone to love us who doesn't love us back, and made fools of ourselves, and made things uncomfortable for them at some point in some way, right? Even though we, you know, to us it's love, but to them it's a pain in the neck at best and scary at worst, right? And so, but being honest about those impulses and then seeing what new narratives come out of that. So if you've got, it was interesting, is that something you want to do, Neil, make Lysander, in this case, is this an actual thing you want to do, make Lysander the gay one, or is it just an example? Just getting its interpretation.
It's really just an example, because it could just as easily have been, say, you know, Romeo, or if we're talking about Hamlet.
Well, I think it's a fun game to play.
Ophelia.
What happens if we turn this character gay, or
right,
queer, or whatever we want to do with that character?
Exactly.
I'm going to go with Lysander is gay. And then that makes it a very interesting level playing field for me. Now you've got two men who are behaving badly. You've got one who is gay, but pretending he loves Hermia and running away with her. What's the motive there? And it does happen. Why did Elton John marry Renata, I think her name was, his sound engineer, back in the 80s, when everyone more or less knew he was gay and he was more or less out as bisexual? Why did he feel somebody who was super queer and now a super advocate? What were the impulses that made him marry Renata? And reading his book is very interesting, and about how badly he feels about how he's treated her, and how angry she is on many levels with him. Not just because he pretended to be straight or tried to be straight, but because she was married to him and he's quite a difficult person, as he himself admits in the book. But still, right? All of that's to play with. Then you've got these two men who are both not behaving with their right heads on, and so you just have to embrace that while still showing compassion for the characters. You have to go. You have to play that betrayal. You have to look at that and look at what. And also the fairies and Puck are in particular, they're there to see things that the others don't see. And it changes Puck's, Puck puts potions on people's eyes and makes them fall in love with the wrong people at the wrong time, is how that story works. So Puck can be somebody who, Puck is very easily made a queer character, because Puck is incredibly flirtatious, incredibly carefree, incredibly, in the positive sense of the word, promiscuous, and is a great, says what fools these mortals be. It's like, why can't you just liberate yourselves instead of getting into all this crap? And why are you so easily swayed? Why are you so aggressive about it when you fall in love with that? He makes them fall in love with each other. He doesn't make them fight each other. That's something they choose to do. And again, once you're aware of that, you can start leading your project, your performers, everything. And again, with Shakespeare, the set is a character. What does the forest think of what is happening? These are the spirits of the forest. What does what does the earth think of how we are inhabiting it, and how we are using our options? And queer people are not exempt from bad behavior. I'm sad to say, from bitter experience, we are not exempt from bad behavior. And so this gives us a wonderful opportunity to look at all of that. And the desire for heterosexuality. He could have a sincere desire to be in love with Hermia. It could be the thing that he thinks, I'll die if I'm not a heterosexual. And that's really interesting. And then when he has to fight Demetrius, and they're talking about having a duel, that's a very interesting position to be. And again, whatever you do with those characters, you make Lysander, obviously making Lysander a woman, immediately everyone's coming down on a queer relationship and trying to stop it, and they run away. And then you have this beautiful thing of these two women, and you can play with the stereotypes of empathy and understanding, and then one of them just goes toxic and starts fighting, and then Hermia's left with another man, really, like, what's going on here? Do you see what I mean? You can play and play and play with it. I think it's about running into it rather than, oh, this is a problem. Like, okay, this is a problem for the characters, which Finch already identified, that these are things that are problems for the characters. And I'm doing a writing workshop tomorrow over at the Playhouse if you want to come to that. Because the thing I'm passionate about is making problems for your characters. You've probably heard the phrase, torture your characters, that you as a writer must torture your characters. I think you as an actor must choose the most difficult path for your character and enjoy playing that difficult path. Do you know what I mean? Because that is who we really are. People who get up in the morning and think, I can't get through this. I can't pay all these bills. I can't make all these people happy. I can't keep myself clean as well. I can't do all of this. And then you just go, okay, I'm going to try and be healthy. I'm going to try and do the right thing. And then you snap at somebody. And then you embarrass yourself. And then you hate yourself in the mirror, even though you've worked so hard to love yourself in the mirror. That is what a human being is, a series of battles to be the best you possibly can be, and a series of baffling mind traps that you're trying to work through. Like, how did I get here? So the more you can do that with the characters, the more brilliantly Shakespearean it is. They don't have to, they don't have to be well behaved. They just have to be trying to live their best lives and fucking it up. Do you hear? Does that make sense? So with you, I think there's a couple more people who were waiting from before the break. Perfect. You're doing so well at this. Thank you.
Fantastic question. So the next one is from Chris Cat on Zoom.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, Rikki. Yeah, I recently played a female type vampire, and for some apparent reason, I excelled, and in the role. And someone suggested they'd love to see me play Titania, and I wanted to ask you if you would agree that the approach to start work from the outside in, from the physicality first, which could, apart from intention, why the obstacle, start from the physicality first, which might help to transform into her shoes.
Oh, that's really interesting. I think you should not start with the physicality, because I think that I've seen you release female characters before in different ways. I'm cheating here because I know your work. I would say that you should start with, because is this a Shakespeare production, a production of Shakespeare?
Yeah, because I've been studying
adaptation.
Yeah, I've been studying Shakespeare intently for the last 6 months.
Right.
With some Globe theatre people.
Yeah.
And I thought my acting teacher said, I approached him after playing this female character. Yeah. And he said, he'd love to see me in Titania or Goneril. So he suggested these roles.
Okay. So Chris is asking about the physicality of playing as somebody who's ostensibly male, playing a female character, and how to do that and how to approach that. And you should approach it from the physicality inwards. And I would say Chris is actually a dancer. So I can see why he wants to go from that position, but I would say that you should go from the words. I think that you should, obviously I think you should approach it physically, but I think that you're closer to it than you think. And therefore you don't, again, you're looking at ways to perform the gender of the character instead of how to explore the gender of your character through the character, which is going to be the best way to do it. The thing there with Titania is you want to look at the words and look at what Titania wants and what she is doing to get it, and how Titania's big thing is status. Titania is a queen of a fairy, of the fairies, and so that's what you want to think about. How are you the queen of the fairies? What is a fairy, and what is that spiritually? And then speak those words, and then try and make those words fill your body. Because Shakespeare writes great maps for the character. So once you've made a simple decision, I want to play this direction with the gender, you then just let the words take you there. It's a bit like getting into the sea, and you want to, if you want to choose the tide that will take you, you cannot go swim against a sea tide. You can't. So you have to decide which way you have to go, which way is the tide going, and then make yourself one with the water. There's this famous story of the guy a month ago, maybe a bit more, just around Christmas, who fell off a boat and was in the sea for 3 days and survived. And everyone said, there's absolutely no way this person's going to be alive. And he said, how I did it was I decided to relax in the water, and then I just waited for plankton and things to come by, and I ate them. And he said, I only ran out of energy right at the end when I saw the ship and I started waving and screaming. That's when I nearly drowned. It's really, really interesting. And but when he just went, I'm with the sea, he actually became a living thing that belonged in the sea. And I think that with a character, particularly with Shakespeare, that you're looking for a way to, don't fight if you want to fight the script, do another script, but look at the gifts that Shakespeare's giving you, and you'll know how to move, and you'll know how to speak, and you'll know how to inhabit it. And because once you look at the words, there's so many clues, and all these things we're talking about, gender, magic, and class, all of those things are there, intellectualized, but also Shakespeare doesn't just intellectualize, it's in the rhythm and the meter of the words, the choice of the words. Like, it's astounding when you do those games with the meter, and then you go, oh my God, I can actually understand what I'm saying. Whereas you think, well, that's too mechanical, I won't get there. But Shakespeare had a brilliant combination of intellectual and instinctual that really made these things living texts to this day. In fact, more so, they're more interesting and more relevant than they were 50 years ago. And so that's what you should do with the character.
One last question, may I? How about a vocal adjustment? Would that leave that alone?
Well, again, you have to decide on the character, rather than saying, I think women have voices like this, so I'm going to do a woman's voice. You don't have to do that. Lots of women have voices deeper than yours. So you have to go, what is this person's voice? Don't try and convince them that you are not a man. Try and convince them that you are Titania. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
There's more than enough woman in you to get to release. You don't have to spray it on, unless you're playing a character that is spraying on and trying out things. But it doesn't sound like that's what you want to do with Titania.
Yeah.
You just want to channel her.
Yeah, maybe chest, voice, or head voice, but that's something else that can come later.
I think it's about intention. Think of how you're looking at somebody who's high status. They tend to lower their voices anyway.
I played Oberon on film, in a short film. So I know the piece pretty well. It's my favourite Shakespeare play.
So now you get to play the other part.
Yeah.
So we have one more over here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Hi, Rikki. Also, I just loved that your answer to Chris's question. It was really lovely to listen to. But this is probably going to be a bit of word vomit because I'm not entirely sure how to word it.
We've
yet,
got one person to deal with just here, and then we'll come to your word vomit.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sure.
No problem at all. I think we might have to. No, yeah, we will come to your word vomit with gratitude. Aye. We're talking about Olivia in 12th Night here. Right. Olivia is presented as a character with tons of options. And being choosy, turning people away. And then in comes Cesario, which is Viola dressed as a boy, and all her options vanish. That's a really interesting thing. So what do I think of Olivia? I mean, obviously 12th Night is the gold standard in gender play. It's just such a great piece, and there's so much you can do with it. And Olivia is a fascinating character. What you have is, as Olivia her brother has died recently, and Viola's brother, no, Olivia's brother, no, I understand why you said that, but Olivia's brother, I'll put it a different way. So Viola and her brother Sebastian are on a boat. It gets shipwrecked, and they're cast away on this island, a kind of mythical island with a lot of Italian names. It's clearly Mediterranean, could be Malta. It's that kind of place, right? And they get separated, and she, feeling as a woman who's in danger, kind of running around this island, she has to get a job because it wasn't easy to travel. You couldn't just jump on the EasyJet then. And so she decides that she's going to get a job in the local court, and she's going to pretend to be a boy to do this because it's hard for women to get jobs. But also, as it goes, it's very easy to interpret it as Viola's just been gagging to be a boy and jumps on it, and because she really is good at it and she's really into it. And then she instantly starts to get a crush on her boss, who is in love. He's the kind of duke of the local duke, and Orsino is in love with Olivia, who Olivia's brother has just died, and she is perhaps using that as an excuse to say, listen, I'm not seeing anybody, my brother's just died, so don't come to knocking at my door asking me on dates. I'm not interested, I'm in mourning. But she seems to be not that much in mourning. She just is not interested in any of the suitors that keep harassing her, particularly Duke Orsino. The Duke, who is stunned by how sensitive and intelligent and gorgeous and disturbingly attractive his new boy that works for him is, he says, you're going to work because everyone falls in love with you, basically. So you go over and you use the words that I'm no good at using and tell her how much I love her. Viola's like, well, this sucks. I'm in love with you, and now I've got to go and tell somebody how much you're in love with them. And she turns up at Olivia's house. Olivia and her servants say, we're not seeing anybody, go away. But Viola doesn't like hearing no, and talks her way into Olivia's presence. And Olivia immediately starts playing games with her, puts on like a veil and puts it on her servant and pretends that she is the servant and her servant is her. So there's a lot of mixing up of class and gender already starts to happen in this one scene. And they toy with Viola, who gets very, very arsey with them and says, like, you're taking the piss now, stop it. Which one of you is who? What's going on? And then she says to Olivia, okay, I see now, you think you're gorgeous and you think that you can take the piss out of people, but you make women look bad. And my master's a really nice person, and if you don't like him, don't treat him badly, just say no and don't play these stupid games. Olivia's like, who is this sexy person who's just telling me about my shit? And falls madly in love with Viola. And Viola soon realizes, oh shit, she's fallen in love with me. But that's kind of fun, but kind of weird, and everything's turning into a big old mess. And that's the story up to there. I mean, it's a big play with a lot of twists and turns, but all of that is, I mean, I think, again, Shakespeare plays always with the strictures of class, like having no money is a stricture, but it's also a freedom because no one is dependent on you because they don't expect any money from you. And whereas being rich means you can have what you want, but you're less likely to be able to choose who you want to marry. And and everyone is watching you, and of course you're terrified you'll lose your money, so you've got to marry people you don't want to marry, etc. So he's always looking at all of those things, but he's also looking at, and again, it's a big thing of how people from different, she's not just perceiving Viola as a boy who has an insight into the female mind, which is incredibly sexy to her. But she also is perceiving somebody who is pretending that they're a different class as well. So has a certain kind of arrogance and certain kind of, so there's a lot going on. And what she's seeing, I think, is herself. She's seeing somebody who gets her and sees her, which is always sexy. And what Viola says is, you are quite trapped. You are quite trapped. And that makes somebody fall in love with them. That is what has happened with Harry and Meghan. He has seen how trapped he is. And that's what he keeps saying. He keeps saying, we're all trapped, the royal family's trapped, it's a load of bullshit, and we've got to stop this. And everybody's angry with him about it. But that's all he's saying, it's all a big trap, and I don't want to be in it. And it's amazingly how hard that is to say, and he's been honest in saying, he literally said, I had a crash course in racism. I didn't know it existed. I had a crash course. Once somebody's talking about your kid and saying, what color is it going to be? Once they're talking about your wife, you're like, oh. So, and suddenly he saw how it all works. Does that make sense? And that's what Olivia is. She's suddenly going, I mean, I would say the way to look at that character is she's seeing a lot of things. Like, maybe again, you can play that she kind of knows that this is a woman here, or at least somebody who is non-binary, who's existing in a, and it's just this moment where she goes, oh, this is why I don't like all these men. This is, I don't like that. And this is somebody coming at it from a different kind of strength and a different kind of masculinity.
And I find it so hard that the payoff at the end is, oh, surprise, really liked this girl, and now you're married to his twin brother. Really looks like her, but it's another case of mature, wise, or sensitive, who's a bit of a man-child.
So the tragedy of the play is that she then, when she finds out that that it's a girl, she has to let go, but she then marries the brother, who is like a less mature version of the sister. But is that what's really happening at the play? So Orsino, who has a disturbing attraction to this boy, suddenly gets to find out it's a girl, so everything's fine. And Olivia, who's been in love with this boy, and suddenly finds out it's a girl, so that's cut off. But there is another boy identical, which means that boy is quite androgynous too. And also, once you've got, if you play them as two non-binary people who are playing with that, then that becomes an interesting thing. Maybe she's freeing him to be as feminine as he wants to be with her. So maybe she's like, I'm not so sure. And then maybe he has like a little effeminate gesture and she's like, oh, hang on. Maybe we can make this work. Maybe she's pan. but her type is someone in the middle. And for me that helps the play, because why doesn't anybody notice that they're totally different people? So that because they're both, you know, they're both like a yin yang, you know, around that his masculinity has a femininity, her femininity has a masculinity, and they both are very happy, and they're both very devoted to each other and desperate to see each other again. Maybe they were androgynous twins, non-binary twins who, you know, who really feel like who free each other in particular ways. And maybe that freedom is being offered to Olivia and to Orsino at the end of the play. And just how you interpret some of those lines, and maybe you have to cut some, because you know Shakespeare was having to make compromises, just as in Tennessee Williams was clearly writing queer relationships in some of the plays, but couldn't, even though gay characters are always there, they're usually off stage. But he clearly wanted to write Blanche du Bois, you know, is very close to himself, and you know, there's a lot of coding that has to happen. So Shakespeare has to do the happy ending, but he's given us a lot of queer action up to then, which remember, this is 500 years ago. This is a big revolutionary thing to do. It's, you know, it's Victor Victoria for 450 years earlier, right? Where you get to play with those things and it's a thrill. So I think it's there to play with and edit. I don't even know if you need to cut anything. It's just in the responses. Like, I think Olivia's big line is almost wonderful, isn't it? But she's almost wonderful when she sees that, oh, okay, so he was a boy, and she kind of goes, almost wonderful doesn't necessarily mean, oh, great. It means how extraordinary. I've just suddenly had a whole door open in my head, and this could have been worse, you know, and also, are they going to go off and go, well, you know, because Orsino's supposed to still like her. Maybe they're going poly. Maybe it's who, you know, there's a lot to play with there. And I don't understand why it's not been done 100 times before. I don't understand why we're not bored of queer versions of these pieces, because it's screaming at you to do it.
I've seen a production of like where Orsino is disappointed when Cesaro turns out to be like that. He's falling Cesaro.
Yes, and actually, you know, so yes, there's productions just saying, can they hear you through there?
Can you hear me on Zoom?
No, they like that. Have you got your sound on? You should. You should have your sound on, so they. It's just not loud enough. So they're just saying that there's a production of Twelfth Night where and I think there's been a few where also, you know, is visibly disappointed that actually Viola is not, Cesario is not a boy. But there's lots to play with there, isn't there? I think they can all be pretending to be happy. There can be a lot of fixed smiles at the end. Great. Oh, wonderful. You know, because that happens. Like, okay. And then as they troop off, they're all thinking, well, we've all been fucked over somehow, right? I mean, that's a really, and it can be funny. It can be funny, and it's say, oh, tragic. And but you can play those moments up. You know, rather than wishing it was a different play, just go, okay, what does this mean then? If we've invested in this, is the end of this play a tragedy? And do we play that tragedy? Are there lingering touches as they, you know, do people have to kind of pull their hands apart and push them together, you know, and restore, quote unquote, the order of things? Because there's a lot of disappointed people on that stage. I've got our poor, because of course there's Antonio, who, like the other Antonio in Merchant of Venice, is, for some reason, both those Antonios with that same name are just bang on gay characters. Antonio says, I love you, to Sebastian. I'm gonna take my purse, look after my money. I just trust you with everything. And, you know, and again, it's a different class. He's a ship captain, right? And then this, but he is like falling head over heels with Sebastian, and he's extremely disappointed when he thinks that Sebastian has stolen his money and has let him down. And it's classic, you know, a classic, oh, I let you into my house, I let you into my life, you know. And yeah, because they even sleep in this cottage for like 3 days together, and there's a whole thing going on. And then he's like, well, basically goes, keep my money so that you'll come back. So he's completely obsessed. There's so much to play with in all of that. And so and that leaves it very open for Sebastian to be someone who is gay or bi or bi-curious and a bit heartless about it. It happens. Again, I've got bitter experience of all these things. So, I mean, but they can be played equally for laughs and for pathos. It's so rich. And again, it's about just letting this text take you there rather than wishing it was something else. Yes, thank you. And then we have, who was it who had the word vomit? Thank you, you're keeping track. Quick 5-minute break again. There was somebody online who was going to ask.
Oh yes, is that me now?
It is.
Hi. This is actually, it's interesting asking this after the discussion we just had with the previous question, because I wanted to ask about like, obviously queering characters in Shakespeare has done quite a lot now, thankfully, and has opened up possibilities for the stories in a huge way, and same with changing characters, gender identities as well. And I wanted to know your thoughts about how you can, if in a production, make sure those choices help amplify the show rather than, I don't know, becoming gimmicky.
So the question was, when you know, fortunately now there's much more open-mindedness about how to cast characters and the genders of the characters and the sexualities of the characters. But how do we be mindful about avoiding gimmick? How do we avoid being gimmicky? I would say don't worry about avoiding being gimmicky. Shakespeare is gimmicky, you know, forests move and you know, witches turn up, and you know, theatre is gimmicky. The Lion King is gimmicky. There's lots of great theatre that's gimmicky, but I know what you mean. You want it to enhance it, and the first part of your question is really the strongest part, isn't it? Which is, how do you make it so that it feels like part of it? And I get what you mean. Is it like, don't spray it on? Don't, you know? Yeah. My best friend is really, one of my best friends is really obsessed with, doesn't like modern Shakespeare, because they'll say, they mention a dagger and they pull out a pen or something, and it just drives him absolutely bonkers. And it says, it's just, you know, if you don't like the play, why are you doing the play? I like modern interpretations of it, but sometimes you do go, well, I'm hearing one thing and seeing another. And I think that it depends on your production, and there's no one way to do it. There's the Baz Luhrmann way, which was very, very clever and very thought out, which is, you know, if we're going to use guns instead of rapiers, we're going to make that the rapier the brand name of the gun and show it on the gun. I mean, it really thought everything out. So that's what makes it really work. And having a newsreader tell the story at the beginning was just literally a stroke of genius. As soon as they did that, you know, we're in safe hands here. They know what they're doing. And and I think that's a very gimmicky version of it. Maybe some people don't like it because it is, but I thought it just put it in a place where you could understand what was going on, even if you didn't understand everything they were saying, which you know is the biggest barrier to introducing people to Shakespeare. So it's fine. It's being imaginative, but you know, when something's crap, it's gimmicky, and when it's good, it's inspired, and that's just they're just quantitative words. You know, they're really everything's gimmicky. So you just have to go, how are we going to do this, and how are we going to do this sincerely, and how are we going to do this truthfully, and how are we going to do this elegantly, even if it's about something awkward that's not elegant. But it's, you're really looking for because that is one of the things that makes Shakespeare so astounding, is the elegance of it all, and the humanity that is offered almost every character, even ones that are reprehensible, and so when you're creating this piece, why are you changing? There's a reason in your heart that you are changing the traditional gender perception of this character, or any perception of the character. So why are you doing that? And then go for it. Understand why you're doing it, then go for it. It's when people go halfway with things, they will fall apart, and they've got a great gimmick and it lasts for the first 10 minutes of the play, and then it just evolves into people saying the lines in Shakespearean ways, and just being really committing to it. I mean, Shakespeare is always interpreted. I've never ever seen a production of Midsummer Night's Dream where anyone looked even vaguely Greek. Never. I've never seen one where I thought, well, this is Athens. I've been to Athens a few times, and I've never ever thought, well, that's Athens. I've never seen a Romeo and Juliet where people talk with their hands like Italians do. I've never seen a Romeo and Juliet that looked Italian to me. And or maybe the Zeffirelli film, and he's an Italian. He did period. He decided it was a contemporary play of that time and did it in that time. But that's why it's so successful. And very wisely, Baz Luhrmann chose an Italian to play Romeo, right? He's half Italian, German Italian, isn't he? But his name is Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, how Italian do you want him to be? And so it was making those decisions that they were gonna, in that, a lot of the characters, not all, but a lot of them look very Latin. You know, he's said it somewhere that looks very, it's kind of like LA, and a kind of like Mexico, kind of, you know. So, and the more you lean into your concept of it, the better it will work. But don't, when other people have been so cavalier, like I said, have you ever seen Midsummer Night's Dream where they were Greek? So it's clearly, and people have accepted it. So you can be as creative as you want to be. Bearing in mind, you know, again, Othello, they're all Italians. Do they look Italian? Does it feel like Italy? They're in Venice. He's essentially Italian. Is he Italian? He's an immigrant. Is he? I can't remember if he's born in Italy or not, Othello. But again, I've met Black people in Italy. Have they really made him like they are? We're quite lazy with Shakespeare. And so I think a lack of commitment of kind of, it's such a heavy lift, so many lines, so many scenes, so long that people get exhausted, and then they kind of have one idea, let's set it in an office, or let's set it in, and then they run out of ideas instead of really going, this is an Italian office. Are you with me? So do I, in the terms of the gender, do I think, so I'm kind of avoiding a question, I would say that don't be afraid of it being gimmicky, just be afraid of it not being committed.
Yeah. Cool.
Commit to it. Once you're going for that gender change, look for all, again, look at the text, because the gifts are there, the Easter eggs are in there for you to really enjoy and play with it.
Cool, thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah.
So commit, but always remember their characters. Always make them as layered and complicated as Shakespeare has made them. So no villains, just people who are called villains. No heroes, just people who are called hero. And then it will come alive.
Yeah.
And that's when you've seen it and it's come alive, it's because someone's done that.
Great, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Got one in the room here. And they don't have to. It's just that at some point, there's a lot of argument about this. I'm really kicking it back against people like, where are all these black people coming from in all these Shakespeares? It's not authentic. And you're like, has it ever been authentic? But go on.
I don't think, as far as we're aware, went to Italy.
No.
So is it actually any more authentic to set it in Italy? Just because that was where it was originated? Because I don't think Shakespeare had authentic.
That's a good point. So that's a really a great point has been made. Shakespeare is not necessarily authentic anyway, so why demand authenticity of it? Because again, it's not a law, but we have access to that because we could travel in the ways that he can't. We can see pictures and paintings, and we've got, our brains are so much more full of. We've got Google, so right, and Shakespeare didn't have Google, and so the authenticity is there. I'm saying that whether you are authentic or not, commit to your vision. Like, I'm all for authenticity and people going there, especially where it's not been there before. And I'm also all for owning it and taking it to your own place. So, for instance, they decided in Baz Luhrmann's one, they could have said it was in Venice Beach if the play had been in Venice. In LA, there's a Venice Beach, right? And they could have said it all there. And it's kind of like Venice Beach. And I think they call it, what's the town again? Verona? So they call it Verona Beach. So they kind of make it Venice Beach, but do Verona Beach. And so they kind of made their own consistent world out of it. That works. And a very multiracial world or multi-ethnic world, I think, is the way they decided to go with that. But to me, you can explode it and go, we're doing Macbeth, but it's not set in Scotland. But if you're going to set it in Scotland, go all the way, right? And if you're saying we're doing Macbeth, but it's set in the corporate world and they're in the fashion industry, so it's set in Milan, then go for it. Just go for it.
The only visual reference we've got of Shakespeare's play performance from the time is a sketch of the 16th type of Andronicus.
Oh, wow.
Which is set in ancient Rome, but all the little figures that are drawn on it are wearing Elizabethan clothes with a little bit of a sash to suggest a toga. So, if we take that as accurate as what people were wearing back then, it's modern dress, a little bit of.
There's a couple of options there. One is it could have been a ship production, because there are some productions right now where people took pictures of them. You'd say, I'm sorry, that is not kind of theatre I would go to. It's a bit dodgy, that one. So it's a shame that's the only picture around. Could happen, right? But let's assume that, the way it was so stripped down, wasn't it? There were no lights. There were no sound systems. There were no curtains. It was done. So it was done on a Sunday afternoon, kind of the thing. Went on. I think it was afternoons. It was matinees, and you were out in all weathers. And so I assume that stripped down thing of, because was there a set either in the, right? So it's just that there's, to them it was all black box essentially, right? You just doing it, and there's a stage, and all stages look like stages, and maybe someone can lie on a couch, because there's very few stage directions. There's not. She gets up, she sits down. They leave. They exit their entrance, and sometimes they say stabs him. It's very, 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 very minimal. Sometimes it doesn't even say that, and you have to work it out.
I'm interested in what you were saying about authenticity.
Yeah.
I'm currently queering a fellow, and I'm having conversations in my head about being a mixed race person playing black character. Some of the description in the piece about being really dark skinned and this. And I know you suggested something at the beginning when you said you don't think, black people and white can't play white characters and white it doesn't work. I'm just interested in what, like, if you go into a bit more detail about that,
It's again about context, isn't it? The just as to finish up with that statement of, okay, so they decided we just wear, kind of like street theatre, where you might wear one thing that just denotes your entire character, or some people do just a mask or a hat, and everybody just wears their ordinary clothes, and you become the character out of a dressing up box, essentially. Sounds a bit like that's how Shakespeare would have done it, and that's a perfectly reasonable way to do it. Just as it's a perfectly reasonable way to do it, go full production. Olivier, in comes the skyscraper and the cranes and the projections and stuff that Shakespeare never would have had, because again, authenticity is what we've got and what we want to do. But all of that, there's no wrong way or right way to do it, except you committed or you didn't commit, and it transported me or it didn't transport me. So that's really, I love a minimal production. When I design a production, it's like an installation box. I use as few props as possible. I just want the people to see the characters. But I appreciate, and you walk in and you go, oh my God, it's like a real house. Look, there's all the stuff, and the cooker works, I appreciate that kind of theatre too. It's about how going for it. It's about making me feel something. And so you're committing to your gender choices, making me feel something. And if it's not, then it's failing, right? And it doesn't have to make you feel good. It can make you feel challenged. It can make the audience angry. Some of the best pieces of work have made people very angry when they first saw them, because they were disruptive and because they weren't what they were expecting, either from that person or from that piece of work. And then later on, everybody reassesses, and suddenly never do a Sarah Kane, and suddenly she's a genius. Whereas at the time they were like, she should stop working, right? And now everybody's like, what were we thinking? So you have to go into your art not as an audience pleaser, but as an audience, as a self pleaser. You have to go make art that you love, and that is meeting your own standards, and then try and communicate to people with that. Well, considering, it's very important to consider the human being that is watching your show as well. But if you're not starting from an authentic place, but I believe that masturbation is gorgeous, but it's good manners to stop when someone else comes in the room. So when you've got your creative process, then you have to go, well, if I'm inviting you to see it, I've got to give you something. But hopefully it's your heart and soul and your commitment to the vision, rather than we had a good idea that got you here, and now we're actually not going to do it. We promised you queer Shakespeare, but we're not really going to do that. That's when it's annoying. And with your and really what I'm talking about is perspective, which links up with what you're saying. I'm afraid maybe this isn't the right thing to say, but I would say if you want to have a light-skinned Othello, then everybody else has to be light-skinned than you. It's as simple as that. Or what if everybody's darker than you? And what if everyone has cognitive is it cognitive dissonance, well, what you see is not what you know, is it going on in their mind? Right? Do you understand? I'm from 5 kids, and we're all very different colors. I'm kind of in the middle of it. So I've got brother and sister who are darker than me and then very dark, beautiful. And then I have brother and sister lighter than me, then very light. And it's very interesting to see all of our different perspectives on our color and the privilege it gives us in different situations and takes away from us in different situations. And so much of it is about, you know, if I'm in Hong Kong, I'm very dark. And if I'm in Uganda, I'm very light. Does that make sense? So it's about perspective, but that doesn't mean it has to be a healthy perspective. It can be, the characters can see something totally different from what we see, as long as you acknowledge that and you run with that. The character's seeing something totally different from what you see. Is that making sense? Rather than we're just ignoring this. Because when you're taking a thing on that's about race, you can't. To ignore the race is you're really defanging it in a particular way. You really better have a better idea. Does that make any sense? So you can go, they're all much lighter, but you're going to have to work out that why people are saying this, even if it's not the case. But you know, so there, if you go into an Asian family, somebody who seems very light to us is too dark for that family if they're a family that worries about caste systems. Am I making any sense? There color issues are there through every single nationality, every single one. There are darker people who work in the fields usually, and lighter people who don't, and there's all kinds of things. And if you take the most Caucasian group of people, blonde people are seen very differently from dark-haired people, and red-headed people, for some reason, seem to inspire extraordinary levels of racism in people, like violent responses. And it was very interesting. I saw a headline on the train here, and it was, you know, the usual going on and on about Harry, and I think it was Julie Birchall, and her headline is something like, he's lost his carefree ginger something, and I thought, what's his hair color got to do with this? So she's got a package, and it's all about, you know what I mean? It's always about these superficial things, which aren't superficial if you're being stigmatized for them. So it's about you working that out. There's so many ways you can play it. You can play it as somebody who was dark once and has been using a lot of lightening cream. Think, you know, let's think, I don't know if this is true about him, but let's think the perception of Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson at 19, Michael Jackson at 39, right? Extraordinary difference. What's going on in this head of this extraordinary person, right? You know, good or bad, and it's extraordinary person, an extraordinary life. What's going on? So you can play with that. So you've got a character and they're trying to make themselves whiter. And then you know what I mean? Then, oh, this is why they're that color. But people are still saying they're too dark. But it's really, look, and I bet you any money if we sat together and unpacked it, we'd find that narrative in that story. We would find it. Shakespeare is honestly, it's just filled with opportunities like that. Every now and then you hit a brick wall and it's just not gonna work. It's just not gonna work. But I'm pretty confident about that. And then, you know, lightning creams is a whole issue for Black people, right? So, boom, I think of a Black audience sits there and goes, whoa, I feel seen. No one's talks about this in Shakespeare. What does he do when everyone keeps going, the more, you know? Yeah, it's there for you. And then you're doing it in a way that's respectful and acknowledging, deepening it. You know, it's taking it further. You're committing to your idea in a way that unpacks so much of what Shakespeare's doing in a way that's almost, you know, performance art. It really accommodates high concept ideas as well as naturalistic kitchen sink ideas. Shakespeare's really super flexible, which is why we're here talking about it when it's centuries old. Oh my God, we're running out of time. Yes, well, we obviously should have done a whole day, obviously, to try and take on a titan like this without at least a whole day, probably a weekend. And there should have been text, and we should have been reading, because I've said so many times, go to the text, and really we should have been, okay, let's go for the text. So I know that we talked about the sonnet 20, which of course is the one that follows the most famous sonnet, which is, I believe at 19 is, how shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thank you. And that's a Titanic poem for a reason, but also just that first line of that first stanza. It's the sonnet that starts with, a woman's face with nature's own hand painted, has thou, the master mistress of my passion. So in, like, straight away, and said something that would be contentious now in certain circles, but back then, the master mistress of my passions. And again, it's, of my passion. And then if you take this and you want to, and if you're, you have to take this poem on and you want to turn it into a play, let's assume. And then you've got this middle part in here where it says, well, the next bit, a woman's gentle heart, but not acquainted with shifting change, as is false women's fashion. And like, oh, we're into the misogyny here. And like, how do I, someone who loves this, how do I navigate through potential misogyny in this being said? Well, is the false woman's fashion meaning that all women are false and all fashion is false? And there are definitely people who are female identified who would think that anyway, that fashion is superficial and bullshit. And so false women's fashion doesn't have to be women's behavior or women's thing. It can be fast fashion or cheap fashion, or like pick up a copy of Vogue and go, this is an unrealistic expectation. And you can play loving Vogue and hating Vogue at the same time, which is what a lot of people go through. Are you with me? It's about context, and you can find ways to characterize it. And does that make sense? And so it can be, I love your womanliness, but I'm not into feminine women. So I love that. I love the masculinity of your femininity. Or it can be self-hatred. This is me, and I hate that about myself, and I love that you don't have it. And if you're asking your characters to be virtuous, then you're defanging Shakespeare far too much. You have to, once you confront people with whatever, and there's tons of internalized misogyny, by the way, in Shakespeare, where women are in these difficult positions and they're so fucking frustrated. And so being honest about that will unlock so much treasure, and will make, it's possible to make, I think, feminist work about misogyny. It's possible to make queer positive work out of self-hatred, because if you're not honest about these things, then we're never going to get anywhere, because we've all been colonized in so many different ways. And Shakespeare talks, as we said, with the Tempest and Twelfth Night and other plays. He talks about colonialism a lot, and the colonialism of the mind, and he is very explicit about that. And whether education is a colonialism of the mind, is my intellect getting in the way? It's giving me so much, but is it stopping me acting? Is it stopping me taking the bull by the horns, so to speak? Is it making me not love things I could love? Or is it making me love things I've been taught to love? All of that is there. And so I love to get a piece like that and go, oh, I don't know how I feel about that, and then having to get over my judgment of the character or the piece or the dialogue and find a way that that tells the truth about how I feel about things, while acknowledging there are different points of view, or that I have conflicting points of view, or conflicting levels of wokeness in me. And for me, woke is an absolute compliment. And are you with me? But if you don't unpack it, if you are trying to simplify it, then why are you doing Shakespeare? Because that's not what's happening. You don't write speeches like to be or not to be. If you're somebody who goes, there's a black and there's, again, you're thinking binary. That's binary thinking, as opposed to how do we unpack this human experiment that has so many flaws but has so much potential. In a time where religion was a massive point of discussion. Right, which so the second you go into the supernatural, you're actually going into you're right. You're absolutely right. Because that really links up what I was saying about storms being queerness. But actually, because a lot of these things, Viola feels that freedom because she's shipwrecked in a storm. Yes. Where people go to the forest, and then there's this freedom, people run into the woods, and then there's this freedom. And so that connection with the natural world is a big, big part of all of this. Yeah, even Romeo gets a lot of courage being in the garden. Especially when sorry, I should say I'll say that again, sorry. I'm just apologizing because I haven't been saying what you've been saying. Yeah. People being pushed into it. When you can disconnect land, you connect nature, you return to a more natural state, which is why it is maybe more natural. So what's being said here is this idea that that I think you heard me saying, but that often in Shakespeare, massive forces of nature free people to explore gender and sexual freedom and romantic freedom, go into forests, that when they're shipwrecked or when they're in a storm, they're left to face themselves, sometimes painfully, as in King Lear, and sometimes kind of in an extraordinarily liberating way, as happens to Viola or to Rosalind, or and sometimes we literally see nature as fairies or spirits, and they are again pushing people into emotions instead of civilized arrangements like arranged marriages, for instance. It pushes them into a place where you're going with what you feel, not what you've been told to feel or told to do. And so I mean, I really love that. And so but also all of this happened at a time when civilization was exploding, and where there was a lot of going around the world and quote unquote civilizing other nations, and conquering the sea, and all of this stuff was really happening in a big way at the time. And Shakespeare was very interested in it, and very interested in, because at that time, of course, Henry VIII had just created a whole new church, and his children went back and forth, all of which Shakespeare would have been very, very aware of and in fact witnessed. The Queen Mary started, burning Protestants, and Catholics were burned at the stake. They took turns to attack each other, and actually in the Elizabethan era, that is when they tried to pull those two things together before it all fell apart again in the Jacobean era. But that discussion over, and also very Catholic in parts of Scotland, and they're not, all of those things were coming together in particular ways. And he was taking his great interest in pagan religions, right? And using them as ways to free the characters. There are priests, and those things are in his scripts, but the big changes come from the pagan beliefs and pagan and ancient gods, which all of which was held on as part of intellectualism and part of art and poetry, which were all the same thing anyway at that time. The violence of nature is a massive part of it, yeah. Shipwrecks, forests, well, woods move at certain points, right? People become woods. So this all is all to say that the reason I'm super, I think I can say, super enthusiastic about Shakespeare and the potential to queer Shakespeare, both as originators creating new pieces, but also as interpreters, reinterpreting, and sometimes traditionally with a twist, and sometimes radical with a twist of the tradition. The sky is the limit. I don't think the sky even is the limit. There is no limit. The sea is bottomless. The sky has no ceiling. And Shakespeare is felt, as a person who didn't travel himself, was able to go anywhere in his mind and inhabit any person, whether it was a 13-year-old girl in love at first sight and insane with lust, or an old man who refusing to accept the honesty of love and the sharing of power. Those all of that. So many of these plays take place in these elemental spaces and give themselves over to high-tech theatre, and as well as simplistic, it's just me and a bit of origami, and I'll make a paper hat kind of theatre. And so I'm really here to share my love story with you and set you free to do it any way that you want to do it. If you have any questions, or that you were too shy or or hadn't formulated themselves yet, you can email me. I'm easy to find. My email is rikki at teamangelica.com. Angelica spelled with a C. And yeah, we should do another one of these and do like a day and actually have people read things and go get into it, because Chris talks about the physicality of it all, but and as I'm saying, I'm talking about the text and I've said like 4 lines, so we can do better than that. But thank you all so much for your questions and your input. I learned so much today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for organising this amazing thing.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you,
everyone. Apologies that we're 7 minutes. If anybody needed to rush off anywhere, but thank you so much, Rikki. That was wonderful.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. Truly my pleasure.